Hello everyone and welcome back for some more Drag Race gossip, secrets and drama. So I'm back for another Have Your Say and this video is for Global All Stars episode 7. So today we're going to be recapping this week's episode, going through the results of the Have Your Say poll, and I'll be talking about a little bit of drama to do with RuPaul getting some backlash after this week's episode, and Vanity Vain claps back at a horror over some previous comments. All that and more coming up in today's video, so let's get started. And just before we get started, if you'd like to join in the fun with the Have Your Say and watch Global All Stars, make sure you check out Paramount Plus and you can use my link as an official partner and you'll get a free trial to Paramount Plus so you can watch Global All Stars as well as a mountain of other entertainment. So please make sure you check out the link in the description and the pinned comment. And thank you to Paramount Plus for choosing me as an official partner. So the queens come back into the workroom after Soa's elimination, and the queens are sad, especially Queen, who says that she got really close to Soa and that she felt like her little sister. And they also talk about it being a bit of a wake-up call for Vanity, who was in the bottom last week, and Vanity said she doesn't feel like she's very funny, but the others disagree. The next day, the queens come back into the workroom and they're talking about who's got to win, and Gala doesn't. And Gala feels like she's getting in her head. And the other queens tell her that she's actually great and she shouldn't listen to those voices and those doubts. So we find out for the mini challenge, the queens have to create a profile for a new app called Archer, which is a new dating app for gay, bisexual and queer men. And the queens have to do it after getting into quick drag. I really liked this. We've had something similar like this before on Drag Race. It's kind of like effectively a mini acting challenge. The standouts for me, I think, were Nilenya, just because she was so committed to that character of being kind of the creepy person, and that stare that she was doing was just looking straight into my soul. Gala, I thought, just looked incredible. She always looks so great, and I don't know how she manages to look so good in just 20 minutes. And Vanity was also just so funny and she really looked like she had committed to the character, and I loved the popping of the balloons. Gala is announced as the winner of the mini challenge, and I think that's a really nice thing because Gala, obviously the storyline so far in this episode had been that she was getting in her head because she hadn't won anything. So we find out that the main challenge this week is the Snatch Game of Love. The queens then have the walkthroughs with RuPaul, and there wasn't a huge amount to say here. Most of the queens were just explaining their characters. The only thing I will say is that I think this has happened a few times now, but RuPaul tends to just tell queens to do a character that she would find funny, and it's usually something to do with a stereotype from their country. So that part I wasn't a huge fan of, basically telling someone like Vanity to do a Swedish chef. The only other major thing that happens is that Pythia is originally going to do Arnold Schwarzenegger, but then RuPaul says that she should do someone Greek because of her heritage. So Pythia then kind of spirals and decides to change her character last minute, but we don't exactly know 100% what she's going to do. Okay, so let's now move on to the actual Snatch Game of Love. Overall, I will just say though, I personally am not a fan of the Snatch Game of Love. I don't like it as a concept. I don't think it works. I think it's interesting they try and switch things up, but they've done Snatch Game of Love for pretty much every All-Stars, and I just find it really boring, and I think it adds an unnecessary element of complication. But also, I don't like that the queens are separated. I would rather have all of the queens together. But let me know in the comments what you think. Do you like Snatch Game of Love, or do you prefer regular Snatch Game? So first up we had Queen Kong, and she was doing King Schlong, which I assume is obviously a parody of King Kong because that's a licensed character and normally you're not allowed to do licensed characters, so she obviously changed the name. I thought Queen was kind of funny. I thought it was quite a funny concept to do this character because obviously it's not a real person. You can kind of do whatever you want. And she obviously made a funny character out of it. So I could see where she was going. We didn't see that many responses from her, but RuPaul seemed to laugh. So overall, I felt this was fine as a Snatch Game, but we didn't get to see that much of it. Then we had Kitty Scott-Claus as Princess Diana. I thought this was such a good impression. Not only did she have the look of Diana, the looking down with the eyes up, that's so typically Diana, but also she had the voice and the mannerisms. But not only that, she was just so funny. We know that Kitty's great in Snatch Game because on her original season, she did Gemma Collins and she was really good at it. And she's a very funny queen. And I thought her responses were just so quick and really well thought out. And she volleyed with RuPaul really well. So for me, this was a standout performance. Then we had Galabaro as Laura Leon, the actress and singer. I'm not that familiar with this character, so I don't know how accurate that is. I know that RuPaul was trying to get her to be a bit more kind of telenovela and that sort of thing, but I'm not really sure if that was actually the type of person she is. Unfortunately though, I don't think this was a particularly good performance. There just weren't really any jokes, and I think you could tell that Gala was really trying, but she just didn't really know how to make it funny. Also, I think it does need to be said that trying to do comedy and improv in a language that's not your native language is so difficult. For example, I do speak Spanish, and I speak it to a decent level, I would say, but if I then had to go on a Spanish-speaking Snatch game and try and do that, I would also find it incredibly difficult, so I can sympathise, but unfortunately I just don't think this character and this performance was that funny, unfortunately. And then finally, we had Nalenia as Valentino. I know the name Valentino and I know that he's a designer, but that's kind of the only thing I knew. The thing I noticed straight away, and let me know in the comments if you noticed this, but he said, "It's me, Valentino," and put his hand up. And I got the reference straight away that that was obviously a play on "It's Me, Valentina" from season 9. So I loved that Nalenia had clearly thought about that, and I thought that was a really smart reference, although I don't think RuPaul understood the reference. And I actually really liked Nalenia's. I wasn't sure what to expect because, again, she was kind of saying she was nervous about this, but I think she really nailed it. She really had the mannerisms down. Not only that, but this makeup that she did and the look was so incredible. I thought it was so interesting the way she managed to completely change the way that she looks. So I was really surprised and very impressed by Nalenia in this. So let's move on to the next group. So the first queen was Vanity Vain as Loreen, who was the Eurovision champion from Sweden. I could see what Vanity was going for because Loreen is quite an interesting person. I've seen her in interviews before and she is that kind of very chilled, very serene, but has got quite a quirkiness to her. And I could see that she was trying to make it funny, but I just don't think that it really landed. I think she probably needed to just go even bigger and almost exaggerate the personality to make it funny. But you could tell that Vanity was really in her head, and this was obviously a storyline that they talked about from last week's episode, that she doesn't think that she's funny. Then we had Alyssa Edwards as Annie Oakley, which was a revival of when Alyssa did that on All Stars 2 for the Rusical. I thought this was fine. I don't think it was my favourite. I do think it was basically just Alyssa dressed up as Annie Oakley. She had a couple of interesting gags and a few jokes about, you know, the barrel of the gun and things like that. Other than that, it basically was just Alyssa in an Annie Oakley wig. But it was funny. I got a couple of laughs out of it. So to me, it was kind of safe and in the middle somewhere, but not the best. Then we had Tessa Testicle as Suzanne Barge. I'm not that familiar with Suzanne. She was a guest judge on Drag Race in the past, and she is quite quirky and stuff, so I think that's what Tessa was going for. I don't know whether the moving around all the time with her hands is something that Suzanne does. Someone can maybe let me know in the comments, but I just don't think this really worked. She kept yodeling, obviously because she's from Switzerland, but I just don't think it was landing, and unfortunately this was just not a very good performance. And then finally we had Pythia as Zeus, which is the Greek god. This was such an unexpected and funny performance because obviously we didn't know what she was going to do. I think that Pythia really nailed this. She really turned this around in such a quick amount of time, but really nailed it. I loved that she was kind of making Zeus out to be this sort of slightly douchey guy character, but it was just so funny. And I really liked that she had a response for every single time RuPaul asked her something, and the outfit just looked so good. I was so surprised that she managed to whip that up so quickly. I did see on social media quite a few people saying how she managed to get that outfit done so quickly, because I also kind of wondered the same thing. And just in case you're interested, Pythia did tweet about this and she said, "You guys keep asking how did I have the muscle suit, but I had already brought it for Arnold, who was the character I was initially going to do. It was literally on the table during the walkthrough with Ru." And she also followed up and said that Tessa Testicle gave her the gold wreath crown from her money runway. So I just thought that was a really interesting fact of how she managed to get this outfit done so quickly. But this was such a good performance for Pythia and I was very impressed, and it was a really, really funny character. And again, doing a character that's kind of mythical means that you can basically do whatever you want. In terms of the two groups, I think Princess Diana, as in Kitty Scott Claus from the first group, was probably my standout. And then from the second group, it was Pythia as Zeus. Okay, so let's move on to the runway for this week, and the category is Eat Me. So I'll go through all of the looks, and then at the end I'll say which look was my favourite. So first up we had Queen Kong, and she said she's serving pavlova, and the walk is definitely a Queen Kong strut. I'm crossing the legs like Naomi Campbell, even though I look like Serena Williams. Then we had Galabaro serving chocolate and candy, and she said she's serving Marie Antoinette, but she's serving more than just a cake. Then we had Kitty Scott Claus serving English breakfast. She says the sausage, the eggs, baby, come and have a bite of my bacon. Then we had Nelenia serving cassata, and she said this is a very, very famous Italian cake. Then we had Vanity Vain serving rotted Swedish fish. Vanity said the obvious choice would have been to go with meatballs, but that was boring. So instead she did this. Then we had Alyssa Edwards serving ice cream cone. Alyssa said she knows that she looks delicious, and they joked that they should call her Priscilla, Queen of the Dessert. Then we had Tessa Testicle serving Swiss cheese, and she said it's so clear what she is, she's just a block of effing cheese. And finally we have Pythia serving spanakopita. And she explains that spanakopita is a spinach and feta pastry dish from Greece, and it's quite delicious, and Pythia thinks that she fits all of those categories. Overall, I thought these were all actually really good looks. I don't think anyone did a bad job. I was really surprised by Tessa Testicles because that outfit was so simple, but it just looked so good and it was so obvious what it was. And Nelenia's was also beautiful. I loved the colour. It just looked so good and it looked so well made. But I do think I maybe have to give it to Pythia. It was such an interesting concept and you could tell what it was once she explained that she was serving spanakopita. And the draping was just so amazing. The green just really popped. So I think for me this week, it has to go to Pythia. So we find out that Queen and Alyssa are safe. We later find out that the winner of this week's challenge is Kitty Scott Claus. And then the bottom two are Galabaro and Vanity Vain. The two of them lip sync to the song Mana Mana by the Muppets. And Vanity Vain wins the lip sync, which means that unfortunately Galabaro is told to sashay away. Okay, so let's move on to the result of the Have Your Say poll. So question 1 was, who did the best in the mini challenge? And we had Galabaro with 35%, Vanity Vain with 31.1%, and then Nelenia with 16.6%. And I think this was quite a difficult mini challenge to judge because I do think Galabaro looked the best. I mean, she looked flawless even though it was quick drag, but she obviously went down the more sexy route rather than funny. Whereas obviously Vanity and Nelenia went down the more comedy route and they did a really good job in that regard. But I guess, yeah, I agree that I would give it to Gala because she probably fit the brief the most because it was about a dating app and I thought that she really nailed it. Question 2 was, who was the best in the Snatch game? And we had 65.6% for Pythia, 19% for Kitty Scott Claus, and then 9.5% for Nelenia. This was a really difficult one, I think, to judge this week because I really liked Kitty's performance. I think she really did nail it. She was really funny. I think she really volleyed well with Ru. She did a great impersonation of Princess Diana. But I do think that Pythia's performance was also really good, but on top of that, it was just so surprising because she changed her character so last minute. I found it really difficult to decide between the two because I think I personally laughed a tiny bit more at Kitty's, but I also feel like Pythia overall maybe was slightly more impressive because she changed her character so quickly. But then it does come down to whether you think that changing a character gives someone more points in that kind of sense, and does that mean that she should be on top? But I really couldn't decide between the two this week, but I can see why people chose Pythia because she was really, really funny and she definitely deserved it. Question 3 was, whose runway outfit was the best? And we had 48% for Pythia, 25.9% for Nelenia, and then 13.1% for Tessa Testicle. And I definitely agree, as I said earlier, I thought Pythia's look was incredible. It was so beautiful with the colours. It was also so well made, which is obviously what we've come to expect from Pythia, but she looked incredible. Question 4 was, do you agree with the winner? And we had 79.5% for no and 20.5% for yes. So a pretty strong result for no. So moving on to question 5, because it's related, it was, if you answered no above, as in you did not agree with the winner, who do you think should have won instead? So we'll ignore NA, but moving on, it would be Pythia with 66.8%, Nelenia with 8.9%, and then Alyssa Edwards with 1.8%. So definitely I agree that I think Pythia probably should have won this week maybe. Although I did really like Kitty in the performance, I do think overall if we take runway into account as well, I do think Pythia's runway was better than Kitty's. Although Kitty's was actually pretty decent this week. But I think, yeah, because Pythia had the storyline of switching so quickly, I do think she maybe deserved the win this week more than Kitty did. Question 6 was, do you agree with the bottom two? And we had 65.2% for yes and 30.8% for no. And moving on to question 7, which is related, it was, if you answered no above, as in you did not agree with the bottom two, who do you think should have been in the bottom instead? So ignore NA, because that's obviously from the previous question, and we had Tessa Testicle with 21%, Alyssa Edwards with 7.2%, and then Kitty Scott Claus with 3.3%. Now with Tessa Testicle, I can see why people would have said that she should have been in the bottom instead. Her performance in the Snatch Game was just not funny and I didn't really get it at all. I think maybe her look saved her because her look was really cool, but whether she should have been in the bottom, I don't know, it was quite difficult. I do think the bottom this week was correct, I hate to say. I really love Gala and Vanity, but I do think that they did arguably the worst this week. And for me, it could have gone either way between the two of them or Tessa, because I think all three of them were equally not great. But they did show Tessa saying that she did get, I think, one funny joke, and RuPaul kind of agreed, so I do wonder if they left that in as a kind of justification as to why Tessa was not in the bottom, because she at least had one funny joke, whereas the other two didn't. Question 8 was, who won the lip sync in your opinion? And we had 84.1% for Vanity and 15.9% for Galabaro. And this was a big topic this week, was the lip sync song choice, which obviously was the Muppets song. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the comments. I personally thought it was actually quite a funny choice. Yes, it is a weird song, but I'm glad that they were maybe doing something a little bit different. But I do think the song was more in Vanity's wheelhouse rather than Gala, because it was more kind of funny and silly. And I do think that Vanity did embody the song a bit more because she went down the more comedy route. So I do agree that Vanity won the lip sync in my opinion. So moving on to questions 9 and 10, I decided to change these questions based on some feedback I'd had from previous weeks. So question 9 was, who do you think will win the season? As in, who do you think's actually going to win, not necessarily who do you want to win? And we had Alyssa Edwards with 55.4%, Kitty Scott Claus with 19.6%, and Queen Kong with 15.4%. And I do think this makes sense because we've talked about favoritism a lot. It does seem like Alyssa is being pushed to the top quite a lot. And I don't think in this week she should have been. I'm not sure if she was bottom worthy this week, but she definitely was not the best by far. And then question 10, which was, who do you want to win the season? And I think it's interesting to then see the difference between who do people think is going to win and who do they want to win. So we had Nelenia with 39%, Pythia with 33%, and then Alyssa Edwards with 10.2%. So it's interesting that Alyssa still got the third most amount of votes for who do you want to win, not just necessarily who do you think is going to win. And I guess that's because Alyssa is still quite a popular contestant. She is very funny, and I think she is good entertainment. But as to whether she deserves to win based on her performance, this week I would say not. I can see why Nelenia is number 1 because I think Nelenia has been very underrated as a queen this season, and she has been good in pretty much every single challenge, and I think she is flying under the radar a bit and she's not necessarily getting the praise that she deserves. And obviously there has been a storyline that she has maybe been overlooked and discredited by some of the other queens this season. But let me know in the comments what you think. Do you think queens like Nelenia and Pythia have a chance of winning, or do you think it's a foregone conclusion that Alyssa will win? Okay, so moving on to the comments this week, and my Patreon member Ashley said, I love the Snatch Game challenge. It's the challenge that makes or breaks the queens. I like Alyssa's and Kitty's impersonation in the challenge. I do agree that Snatch Game I think is a make or break challenge. It's probably one of the harder challenges. As I said, I do not like Snatch Game of Love. I think it's a silly concept and I wish they would go back to the regular one. I also feel like Snatch Game is maybe getting not so good now. I think a lot of the choices have already been used up before, and I don't think we've had a really good Snatch Game in quite a long time. The last one I can think of that I really enjoyed was All Stars 7. So I do think it's maybe getting a little bit tired as a challenge, but I can see why they're keeping it because I think it is a kind of fan favourite at this point. My Patreon member Yael said, I was heartbroken to lose Gala this week. I could see how she went home this week, but in the series she seemed unfairly judged and unappreciated. The rigor mortis seems thick, but I enjoyed Gala and I'm a fan. I definitely agree. I think Gala is an incredible performer and I really was sad to see her go this week. I do think this particular episode, I will agree that she probably was bottom worthy, but I think that she perhaps went home because she had been in the bottom quite a few times now. But I don't actually think that she deserved the bottom placement in the other 2 episodes, and I think that does make a difference. In this week I agree, but in the previous weeks I don't agree, and I think that actually is what came down to the decision. My Patreon member Shara said, once again the rigor mortis with Kitty. She's really only there because Rue thinks she's funny. Her drag is not at the Delulu level she thinks it is. Queen was hilarious. Pythia did absolutely fantastic, having just pulled that character out at last minute. I mean, it was incredible. I do agree that there does seem to be some rigor mortis, as we say, with this season. I don't think this particular episode that Kitty was rigged in that way. I think she did definitely deserve high placement. As to whether she deserved the win is a different question, maybe not, but I don't think that it's fair to say that she shouldn't have been in the top. And I would just like to make a point overall that I've seen a lot of comments, particularly in the Have Your Say poll, where people were saying a lot of really negative stuff about certain queens, particularly Kitty. And I would just like to point out, you have to remember that the queens are not in charge of who gets placed in the top or the bottom or who wins. That's the judge's responsibility. And so it's not fair to send hate to the queens because Rue put them in the top that week. You can say you don't like a queen or you think they didn't deserve it, but to go onto a queen's page and start saying you didn't deserve your placement or you should go home is really harsh, because that's not the queen's choice. The queens are just doing their performances and they have no choice in the judging. So you do just need to remember that it's really not the queen's fault. I do agree though that I think Pythia probably should have won this week though. One interesting thing I saw on Twitter that you might also find interesting was, you may remember that in the episode, in the Untucked bit, Tessa made a comment and said that Pythia got like the best critique that there had ever been. And we didn't necessarily, I don't think, see that. We saw that Pythia got good critiques, but Pythia tweeted saying, Rue gave me the most deep, philosophical and touching critique I have ever heard. It was such a special moment between us that gagged me, and they didn't air it. Even though Tessa comments on it in the Untucked lounge without them showing it. Editors, I need a word. I don't think Pythia actually said what the critique was, but I thought this was really interesting because I wonder whether they didn't show this critique because they wanted to give Kitty the win and they wanted to almost justify it, because I also thought that they were going to give it to Pythia based on the critiques. So I do wonder whether this kind of comes into the editing side of it, that they deliberately edited out this amazing critique because they didn't want to then overshadow Kitty winning. My Patreon member Jessica said, Pythia was the winner for me and to pull it out last minute made it even more impressive. And as I said earlier, I definitely agree. Pythia really pulled this out and did such a great job, and she was so funny. And she also just looked really, really kind of hot in that outfit, and I can see why the judges were talking about that. And I think that really added to that kind of douchey character that she was playing as well. So that to me was a standout performance. My Patreon member Sue said, I prefer the other type of Snatch Game over the Love Game show. I don't feel as if I get to see enough of each girl's drag because if the contestant only calls on them once, it's boring. Also, Alyssa should have come up with something new, not one used from the past. Again, boring. I definitely agree that Snatch Game of Love is not my favourite. I think regular Snatch Game is way better. And I also agree that there were certain queens that we didn't really see that much, such as Nalenia, and I wonder whether that's why she didn't get the win this week. Okay, so moving on to the comments from the Have Your Say poll, and I just want to say thank you so much to a lot of the really lovely comments, and some people were giving really lovely comments saying thank you so much for doing these videos because it must take such a long time. So I just want to say thank you so much. Those comments really do mean a lot because it does take me a while to do these videos, but it's all worth it in the end, and it's really nice to read some positive comments. So thank you to the people who did leave nice positive comments. The next comment that came up a lot was saying that Nalenia or Pythia should have won. And on a similar note, someone said the favouritism really showed this episode. Kitty was good, but this was Nalenia's week to win, or Pythia's, especially considering the runway, which is basically what I said before. There were also a lot of comments about the lip sync choice this week, and someone said that lip sync was a fever dream, but Vanity killed it. Her facial expressions were on point. And someone else said, what the F was that for a lip sync? I actually thought this was quite a funny lip sync choice, and I quite liked that Drag Race is doing something a little bit different. I would rather they do something funny like this every now and then to switch it up, rather than doing some boring mid-tempo song. And I think it does show that you do have to be a kind of all-round performer to do not just dance numbers or ballads, but also doing funny stuff. And we did see in All Star 7 that they did a spoken word type lip sync, so I do quite like they're doing stuff a bit different. But let me know in the comments what you thought. Did you like this lip sync song choice, or did you think that it was stupid and they should have just done a more traditional type song? And then finally, someone made quite an interesting point that I hadn't necessarily thought of, but now I can see. Someone said they're clearly trying to push the safe narrative onto Alyssa for her to eventually have a comeback at the end and get crowned. I would have put her in the top this week. I don't personally agree with the last bit about putting her in the top. As I said, I personally thought that she was safe, maybe even bottom, but probably more in the safe category. But this first part about giving her a safe narrative for her to eventually then have a comeback, I thought that was really interesting because they definitely did show a lot of that in this episode, and they definitely made a point of Alyssa saying that she needs to get back on top. So I thought this was quite an interesting concept that I hadn't thought of. But let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think they're setting up Alyssa to be safe and then get a win, or do you think that she's going to be safe and not win? Okay, so moving on to some very light drama this week. So as you know, there's been a lot of talk about favoritism this season, especially RuPaul favouring the English-speaking queens. And Gala's elimination this week was very controversial because Gala was an extremely talented but also a very popular contestant. And I noticed that RuPaul posted a video this week, and it was actually about Michelle Visage and her birthday, and RuPaul was just saying happy birthday to Michelle and the fact that they've been friends for so long. But if you look at the comments, so many of the comments were about Gala Battle. And for example, people were saying things like, Mexico is a gigantic market for global drag, our artists deserve to be respected and valued, the world isn't ready for toughness like Gala Battle, long live our wilted face. And other people were just writing Gala Battle with love hearts or the Mexican flag. And people in general were just commenting and saying, for example, thank you for missing Gala Battle. It was too much for your program. Your preference for others who are poorly dressed is evident. I hope others cancel subscriptions to never give you money again. And in general, the whole of this comment section on Instagram was just completely flooded by Gala Battle comments. And it was very interesting to see because RuPaul was then getting backlash on pretty much all social media where she was posting this video about Michelle. And it seemed to be an opportunity for people to then criticize Gala Battle's elimination. And for example, I also noticed on TikTok, RuPaul posted the same video about Michelle's birthday. And again, the comments were flooded with comments about Gala Battle. And I think this speaks in general to the fact that there's been a huge amount of talk about favoritism on Global All Stars, and Global All Stars is now one of the lowest rated seasons of all time on IMDb, and pretty much every episode has very low ratings. So it will be interesting to see whether this makes a difference to the editing and things like that for future seasons, and whether they'll actually be a Global All Stars again. But let me know in the comments what you think. Do you think RuPaul deserves this backlash? And do you think it was fair to talk about all of this in the comments about a video about Michelle Visage's birthday? Or do you think that that was too much? There were also a lot of comments from people saying they thought that Ru just didn't like Gala and wanted her gone. And for example, someone said, I love you so much and Gala as well, but it really feels like they just wanted her gone. They wore her out to the point where she just wanted to go. Production was really messy this season. And in terms of Gala Battle, there was also a lot of outpouring of love for her this week. For example, Vanity Vain posted an Instagram story and it was a photo of her with Gala. And it said, I have so much love for this human being. Instantly, we found each other on set, shared stuff with each other I normally don't talk about. You have such a special place in my heart. I love you, my Gala la 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 la. And Vanity posted a photo on Instagram of her lip sync outfit, and Gala commented saying, I love you so much. And just moving on to a little bit of other drama that happened. So you may remember that in a previous video I talked about the fact that Ahura from Drag Race UK had called out certain queens for having promo outfits that were very cheap, and she accused one contestant of having a $29.99 bodysuit from AliExpress, and from the description they worked out that it was Vanity Vain. So after all of that went down, Vanity Vain actually ended up clapping back at Ahura. So Vanity Vain posted a photo of her in her promo look and she said, since everyone seems to be completely obsessed with this look, here, now it can be yours too. And then there was a link that said only for you. And when you clicked on the link, it took you to the AliExpress listing. Now, I actually went onto the listing and had a look. If you look at the price, this is in USD. I thought it was interesting that Ahura had said it was $29.99, but this actually seems to be $69.83. So this is quite a bit more expensive than what Ahura said. So I don't know if Ahura was basing that on anything or whether that was just supposed to be an exaggeration to say that it was cheap. But what I thought was interesting is, if we look at the listing photos, this looks different in terms of the colour to what Vanity then wore in the promo. And so, for example, you can see that the balls on the front are normally just more like pearl coloured, whereas in Vanity's promo, they're yellow. So it does look like Vanity maybe changed this and added some stuff to it, or at least changed the colour for her promo. And we also found out the other week that Vanity did have another look for her promo outfit, but it got damaged by a production member, so she had to wear this lip sync outfit instead for her promo. But what I thought was interesting is last week Vanity was in the bottom, although she didn't lip sync, and I noticed that she was wearing this outfit. So it seems like Vanity had this outfit and it was unaltered by the looks of it in terms of the colour, and so it looks like Vanity then changed the colour of it and did some extra stuff to it for the promo look. But let me know in the comments what you think. Do you think it's okay for the queens to wear kind of low-cost outfits like this if it's for a lip sync? Or do you think that it should all be custom and they shouldn't wear anything from something like AliExpress? So there you go, there was the Have Your Say for Global All-Stars episode 7. Let me know in the comments if you think that Snatch Game should be retired or do you think it's still a really good challenge? And if you'd like to get early access to my videos as well as have your comments featured in my Have Your Say videos, please check out my Patreon and consider supporting me. It goes such a long way to helping support my channel and I really, really appreciate it. And I'll put a link to my Patreon in the description. I'd also like to say a massive thank you to all of my Patreon members who are amazing and support me every month. Thank you so much for being part of my Patreon. I really, really appreciate it and I really do love my Patreon community. You are all legends. If you liked this video, please remember to like and comment on the video to help tell the algorithm that this is a great video, and make sure you hit the subscribe button because it really does make such a big difference to my channel. Thank you for watching and I hope you'll join me again in future videos. Thank you, bye!